As I read about the next dog, Caesar, think about how this dog is different from Rex. After we read today, you'll get to review our dogs so far and pick your most and least favorite. Ceasar, the giant. The dog was enormous. We lived in a small cottage in the mountains of Colorado where I worked in construction, mostly hitting my fingers with a hammer and making serious attempts at cutting something off my body with power saws while I tried to build houses during the day and write at night. I had been looking at the local consumer guide called the Shopper's Bulletin when I saw an ad. Emergency! Am leaving for Hawaii for a career change. Must find home for loving Great Dane named Ceasar, as they won't allow dogs in the islands. Please help. All right, I know how it sounds. Nobody who lives in a small cottage in the mountains of Colorado with a wife and baby should probably even consider a pet, let alone a dog, let alone a large dog, let alone a very large dog. At least nobody with a brain larger than a walnut. But I had once been associated with a female Great Dane named Dad when I was in the Army and had ever since had a warm place in my soul for them. The secondary force, the force that kicks in whenever I visit a dog pound, roared into my mind. The force that says, if you don't take him, who will? This drive has brought me dozens of dogs and cats, a few ducks, some geese, a half dozen guinea pigs, an ocelot, several horses, 2 cows, a litter of pigs, followed by more and more litters. My God, they are prolific. 1 hawk, a blue heron, a large lizard, some dozen or so turtles, a porcupine, and God knows how many wounded birds. Chipmunks, squirrels, and 1 truly evil llama. Am I the only person in the world who did not know they can spit dead level for about 15 yards, hitting your eye every time? And so this man brought Ceasar, who looked more like a Tyrannosaurus Rex than a dog, into our small cottage. His measurements were astounding. He stood 41 inches at the front shoulder, his head a bit higher, and when he got up on his back legs and put his feet on my shoulders, he could drip spit. His favorite hobby seemed to be disseminating spit and slobber on top of my bald spot. But size is relative. Had we seen him out in the open, say from half a mile away in the middle of a large field, he would have looked magnificent. Here, in a small room, he overwhelmed the furniture. Isn't he, you know, my wife said, moving to a position of relative safety in the back of the couch, rather large? The man shook his head. It's just because he's in here. Take him out for a run alongside the car and you won't even notice him. Why, just the other day I was talking to my girlfriend and she was saying how Ceasar seemed to be getting smaller because he fit into her closet so well, kind of back in the dark. He moved towards the door as he spoke, where he likes to make a bed out of the way back in the dark. His hand was on the knob. Why, in a short time, you won't even know he's here. And he was gone. I won't say he ran, but by the time the door was latched, he had his car started and was pulling out of the driveway. It all happened so fast, I don't think the dog even knew he was gone. He sat for a moment, staring at me, then out the window. Then he climbed on the couch, knocking over the coffee table, 2 end tables, and a lamp. He used his paw to push the drapes aside and saw the car just as it was disappearing, and he made a sound like a cross between the closing whistle at a major auto plant and how I imagine the hound of the Bakersvilles would sound. Then he climbed down, moved to the front door and sat, staring at the door, waiting. Well, I said, that wasn't so bad, was it? My wife looked around at the wreckage. When he jumped down, he'd put his weight on the back of the couch and tipped it over, and sighed. What do you suppose happens when he has to go to the bathroom? How do you think Gary Paulson's wife feels about having a Great Dane living in her house? Should she ask him to give the dog to someone else? Pause the video and think about that for a moment. It nearly became a moot point. For a time, it didn't look as if he would live. I have never seen a dog grieve like Ceasar. His heart was truly broken. He sat by the door all that day and all that first night, and when it was apparent his owner was not coming back right away, he lay down with his nose aimed at the door and waited. Although he would drink a small amount of water, he would eat nothing. Great Danes are not fat in the best of times, all angles and bones, and within 2 days he looked positively emaciated. I tried everything. Special dog foods, cooked hamburger, raw liver, bits of bread with honey, fresh steak. He wouldn't touch any of it. The 3rd day, I called a vet. Does he drink? Barely. How long since he's had food? 3 days. A long pause. Well, if he's drinking, he's not going to dehydrate. Give him a couple more days, and if he doesn't eat, then you'll have to bring him in and we'll tube him. Tube him? Force a tube down his throat and pump liquid food directly into his stomach. I looked at Ceasar. Even skinny and lying by the door, he seemed to block out the light in the room. He was civil enough when we petted him, but he mostly ignored us and would pointedly push us out of the way when we came between him and the door. I didn't see how it would be possible to force him to do anything. It was, in the end, nearly 6 full days before he came around. I genuinely feared for his life and had decided that if he didn't eat by the morning of the 6th day, I would take him in to be force-fed. The change came at 6 in the morning on 6th day. I was sound asleep, actually close to comatose, as I'd been working on the construction crew pouring cement forms for basements, and work was killing me, and found myself suddenly lying on my side with my eyes open. I didn't remember waking up, but my eyes were open, and I was staring directly into the slobbery muzzle of Ceasar. I closed my eyes, lost in sleep for a moment. I did not remember getting the dog, and kept them closed. It was no good. A tongue that seemed to be a foot wide and 3 feet long slathered spit up the middle of my face, and I sat bolt upright and swore. Woof! It was not loud, but it was perfect. An exact woof! And he looked directly into my eyes when he made the sound. It was so pointed, so decisive and focused, I knew exactly what he wanted. What was that? My wife asked without opening her eyes. Indeed, she could talk without awakening. The dog, I said, is ready to eat. I rose and made my way to the kitchen, the great beast padding along behind me. On the floor were 3 dishes. One had held canned dog food, a second dried dog food, and the third water. They were all empty, licked shiny, and I took the sack of dried food down and filled one of the bowls. He looked at it, then at me. Was I wrong? I said. Aren't you hungry? He looked at the refrigerator, at the door handle. Something in there? I swear I saw him nod. I opened the door, and he slid his big head past my leg and studied the shelves for a moment before selecting a leftover chicken, which he swallowed virtually whole. Then a cold beef sandwich I'd made for lunch, gone in a bite, and half a lemon meringue pie before I could catch his collar and pull him back. Sit down. He sat, taking a few seconds to work his bony tail down, and looked at me and belched. You're welcome. Do you have to go outside? He jumped up and put his paws on my shoulders. His weight compressed my legs a full inch, and then made for the door. I was in a bit of a dilemma. We lived in the mountains with a great deal of wild country around. The owner had said nothing about whether or not Ceasar would run away, but he'd only been with us 5 nights, and I wasn't sure he'd stay. I took his leash and hooked it to his collar and reached for the knob. I would, I thought, hold him while he did his business, a phrase I've always thought oddly appropriate. We did not have neighbors within 1/4 of a mile, so I threw on a pair of sandals sitting by the door, hitched up my boxer shorts, all I was wearing, and opened the door. I should add here that Caesar's collar was stout nylon, and that the leash, which was about 6 feet long, had a forged steel snap and was made from woven synthetic braid that would withstand a 6,000-pound test, and that I twisted the loop of the leash tightly around my wrist. I think little of it is clear in my memory. I think I had the door open an inch before everything went crazy. Later I would piece it together and come up with some of the details, a time flow of the events leading up to the disaster. I cracked the door. Ceasar got his nose into the opening. He slammed through the door, taking the screen door off its hinges, and headed down the 3 steps to the gravel drive and across the drive, where I believe he had every intention of stopping to go to the bathroom. For a moment I came close to keeping up, but then I lost a sandal. I thought of it later as blowing a tire, and from then on more or less dragged in back of him screaming obscenities and yelling at him to stop. And I think he had every thought to stop, as I said, but my wife's cat, a big Tom named Arnie, that had been off for days looking for a mate, chose that moment to return home. Arnie, of course, had no knowledge that we'd acquired a dog, not just a dog, but a house of a dog to strike terror into a full-size lion, let alone a 10-pound house cat. And I think he had every thought to stop, as I said, but my wife's cat, a big Tom named Arnie, that had been off for days looking for a mate, chose that moment to return home. Arnie, of course, had no knowledge that we'd acquired a dog, not just a dog, but a house of a dog to strike terror into a full-size lion, let alone a 10-pound house cat. The effect was immediate. Arnie was a survivor, and when he saw Ceasar, he did what he was best at. He turned and ran. Not up a tree, as one would suppose, but across the road and along a ditch. With a satisfied growl that sounded like thunder, Ceasar gave chase. My tripping feet had nearly caught up with him. I remember the heel of my one sandal slapping so fast it sounded like a motor running, and I was reaching to shorten the leash when Ceasar went after Arnie, and I never quite caught up again. We went through the neighbor's yard at what felt like 20 miles an hour, cat bounding dog and dragging underwear-clad human yelling in monosyllabic shrieks. My neighbor was standing in his garage and waved. He may have thought I was waving.